Hello and welcome to another Hot Topic. Today I'm with Chris Haskins, Lord Haskins, former Chief of Northern Foods, current Chairman of the Local Enterprise Partnership for the Humber, and thus fairly knowledgeable about business, trade and commerce. Chris, thank you very much for coming in. I want to start off just by asking you about the current fall of the pound and its impact on retail prices. Why is it that the falling pound has caused the food on the shelves to be so much more expensive?
Because we import so much of our food, and obviously if the pound has dropped by 15 to 20%, then the costs of those food ingredients or the food itself will have gone up by not 20%, but a big chunk of that.
And that's not just because of the raw ingredients themselves that have to be imported, it's because of the packaging, of the transport cost, of the whole line of logistics.
Yeah,
and
the whole thing,
that goes along with it.
Yeah.
Right, now, so the fall in the pound has caused a rise in the prices of our staples. Why has the pound fallen?
The pound has fallen, on the benefit side, or the less critical side, is the pound would argue to have been somewhat overvalued at any rate, and that one of the problems we've had is that the pound is stronger than it might have been. But of course the real impact has been Brexit, and as people have lost their nerve, the international money markets have lost their nerve about where this country is going, they start selling pounds, and that's the impact, and we haven't seen the end of it.
You think this is going to go on? This is a long-term trend?
I think that it depends if government keep giving the market shocks and frightening the government at the market, as they did last week, then that will go on. They've got to start talking a sense which restores business interest in business confidence in where the country's going. At the moment, the markets don't know where the country's going, so in that situation, they will sell sterling.
And this latest shock, as it were, to the markets, as you put it, is Theresa May's speech at the Conservative conference, suggesting that Brexit would be on the harder side, that is, which to say that Brexit would not involve remaining in the single market.
Yes, and the implication is that we're coming out of Brexit you're coming out of Europe not for economic reasons. The sort of tacit admission is that the economy probably is going to suffer somewhat. Depends who you are, I think it's going to suffer quite a lot. But on the other hand, the prize of taking back control and sovereignty is so much that we are going to be pleased to be poorer as a result. Now, the Chancellor of the Exchequer has actually made the point that people did not vote to get poorer. But the implication now is that, well, that's what they have voted for.
They were perhaps led to believe during the campaign that voting to come out was not going to be a cause of being made poorer. There's all that business about £365 million a week.
Yes,
and all that.
The NHS was going to be better, we were all going to be happier, all going to have more money in our pocket. That disappeared rather quickly.
I want to just try to find a silver lining to the falling pound. It does make it easier for our companies to export.
Yes, there are certain opportunities, there's no question about that. There's the opportunity to export. There's also the opportunity for import substitution. And the most interesting side of that is, for example, we are here in the Humber buying quite a lot of stuff in for renewable energy, equipment coming in from elsewhere. Well, that'll be more expensive. And therefore, there may be a greater incentive for companies to set up business here to build those sizable piece of equipment here rather than bring them in from elsewhere in Europe.
And that's, you're thinking specifically of the renewable energy sector there.
I could go through a whole lot of areas where that could be done, but this would be the big one.
But would that not be resisted? Let's just use the renewable energies as an example. Would that not be resisted by the Danes, for instance, who would want those businesses, that infrastructure sorting out the windmills to remain in their country, and their country to benefit from a flow of our wealth?
Well, they might resist that, but actually the big company, the Danish company Dong, which is doing it, will make a practical judgment. If it's going to be cheaper to make equipment for what is essentially a British market in Britain, then why would they cut off their nose to spite their face and keep it in Denmark?
I just wanted to, one other thing, that the falling pound, it always seems like an indicator that the British economy, it does mean that the British economy is shrinking when the pound is worth less. Clearly that's perfectly logical, but at the same time the British stock market is thriving and is finding record heights. Is that not also an indicator, and is that not quite a positive indicator?
No, I don't think it is. It's the peculiar reason for that is the low inflation, the lack of inflation that we have here, so that if you're an investor and you want to buy government bonds, you're getting nothing for them. Whereas if you go into the stock market, particularly investing in companies who make their money overseas and bring it back here, and they get the benefit of bringing that money in here on the, it comes in with a high currency. Therefore, the big oil companies, for example, you'll get 4 or 5% on a big oil company today. In a government bond, you'll get 0.5%. So there is an attraction. It's a dangerous attraction, but the stock market offers yields which you can't get elsewhere.
Why then would those companies remain on the London Stock Exchange when they're making their money overseas? Would it not be more efficient for them to try to distribute their equity, as it were, in other markets other than London or in Britain, where the currency is so low?
London is the global centre of the world, and if you want to do business across the world, London is probably the best place to do it. And that's why the big companies come here. That is, of course, one of the big arguments with Brexit, is whether that motivation will be as powerful in the future as it is in the past. I suspect there will be erosion away from London, but I don't worry about Brexit affecting the city of London as much as I do places like Grimsby, as much as I do the car industry, for example, which could be decimated by Brexit.
I just want to these sound quite technical sort of financial matters, and I just want to touch one other, which is that, as you say, the pound has, for the last few years, really been 20% or so higher than one would expect its value to be. One of the resistances against that has been quantitative easing from the Bank of England, creating more pounds. The more pounds you are, we know supply and demand, the more pounds there are, the less each one is worth. And also very, very low interest rates. And you touched on government bonds, on treasury bonds. Is that attempt by the Bank of England to crush inflation, I suppose, more than anything else, with especially the very low interest rates?
And stimulate investment.
And
stimulate investment.
And to stimulate investment, indeed. Is that working? Is that a businesses borrowing more in order to invest in capital and labour in order to stimulate the economy?
Well, I think it has worked. I think it definitely did work in 2008 and 2009, where confidence had to be restored, and it was restored. I mean, the banking system did not crash. And when Brexit arrived, some people thought that the banking system might crash again. It didn't. I think what the Bank of England did in the short term, in terms of increased quantitative easing, keeping interest rates down, lowering them a bit, worked in the short term. But it's out of their hands now. The bank has done as much as it can do. It's back to the government, it's back to fiscal policy, it's back to the budget we're going to have in November, and see what the government is going to do to limit the damage that's been done by Brexit and stimulate some sort of recovery in the economy.
Now, the government and every politician on all sides of both houses, I should say, since you're in one of them, of Parliament, they're in an embarrassing position because they can't really acknowledge the fact that what they're doing is a damage control for the economy after Brexit, because to do so makes them sound as if they're rejecting what they can only present as a democratically taken decision through the referendum. Very tough to say, no, you're wrong, you've shot yourself in the foot, you're going to have more of your precious sovereignty but less money to spend. So it's almost impossible for them to speak truth.
Well, I think public opinion is key to all this. Public opinion at the moment has been codded into believing that nothing much has happened since Brexit. And it will take some time before public opinion begins to think again about the issue. The food price is obviously an example. Once those food prices come in, and they won't come in till the new year, once those sort of things come in, once people start booking their holidays next year, all sorts of things like that arise, and that may then change public opinion. If public opinion mood changes, you can bet your bottom dollar government policy will change with it.
Well, that's perhaps only natural and quite right too, but if public opinion suddenly finds itself, immediately after the referendum, a lot of people were talking about buyer's regret in the way they voted. Would it politically be possible for economic reasons, and perhaps then for reasons the economy changing public opinion, for a government, whatever colour it is, to say let's have another referendum?
Well, I think that's a long way down the road. I wouldn't completely rule that out. I think a lot of things have got to happen first. The first thing is the real impact of Brexit has got to be assessed, and it's got to be seen in people's minds, and everybody's got to realise that. Secondly, the negotiation, we don't know what they're going to negotiate. The negotiation is going to have a huge impact on that impact. So we've got to wait and see that. Thirdly, Parliament at some point will have a say about this. I hope sooner rather than later, and a discussion will take place in Parliament, spelling out to everybody what the issues are. And then a vote will take place sometime along the route in Parliament, I hope some not too far away. And if Parliament says, well, we're not too happy about this deal, government then might say, well, we'll have a general election.
Well, Chris, we might talk about that in the second half. Sorry, I'd have to stop you there. Join me again in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. I'm still with Chris Haskins, chairman of the Humber Local Enterprise Partnership, and we were talking about economic and commercial consequences of Brexit. Chris, before we stopped, you were just saying that you feel certain that Parliament will find itself having a say over the terms of the Brexit negotiation.
Well, I mean, it'll have to. It would be inconceivable that an issue, probably the biggest constitutional issue that this country has ever faced, should go through and a nod from the Prime Minister using her executive powers to do that. That's not conceivable.
Well, it's almost as if the referendum was such an unspecific question that the referendum does effectively give the executive a democratic mandate, if not a...
No, it doesn't. There's no mandatory power in the referendum. The referendum is an advisory power. The decision power still rests ultimately with Parliament.
Well, that is a very constitutional point and a good lawyer's point. There's litigation occurring, just initiated in the High Court at the moment, which is clearly going to go through the Court of Appeal and to the Supreme Court as well. Whoever wins at each stage, it's going to be appealed all the way up for that point. But the point of the Brexit campaign in its own right was for parliamentary sovereignty. A paradox if the Brexiteers choose not to allow Parliament to exercise that sovereignty.
Well, it's a ludicrous position. And of course, the sovereignty that Parliament is doing, Parliament's not suggesting, nobody in Parliament, very few people in Parliament are suggesting the next step is to have another referendum. The next step is to have a proper scrutiny about what the government might negotiate, because depending upon the level of the negotiation will affect public opinion very substantially. If it's seen that we've actually sold out in a big way and done severe damage to the economy, then public opinion will change. If, on the other hand, we get a reasonably good deal, like staying within the single market, then public opinion might be happy with that. Won't be as good as it was before we decided to come out, but it would be better than walking away, as some marketeers, Brexiteers want to do.
You do a lot of your work and a lot of your good offices, as it were, to use that phrase, abroad and in Europe. What do your European colleagues think of the British decision?
Well, I mean, they're shocked, they're alarmed, they're bewildered, and they think we're a bit of a joke. That how could a mature country like this put at risk so much of its history, so much of its strengths on the whim of I don't know, some feeling that prejudice, that discrimination, that we don't like foreigners, for example, or that we want some glorious imperial past to be resurrected. Well, I mean, we've got to get used to foreigners. I mean, they're here. They're going to stay here. And millions of them are going to stay here, and good luck to them.
Well, Brexiteers who are often in that chair and who I can't speak for and I can't put words in their mouths, but they would certainly say they're not xenophobic.
They all say that.
But they would also say that the benefit of coming out of Europe is that we're no longer within the sort of Zollern line of a customs union within Europe, as it were, and that we have, again, the possibility of freer trade with the rest of you used the phrase old empire. I think there's an element of that. But there's a freer trade with overseas nations.
That's not the way it's developing. Actually, what is developing is more protectionism. That is the problem. You can have the free trade with other nations. We can have that within the European Union. There's no inhibition on that. And actually, the deals that the European Union, of which we are a member, have signed up with, I think, 53 countries. We will have to renegotiate every one of those 53 deals. And I promise you, when we renegotiate them, the deal will not be as good as it is under the European Union, because the European Union has got much more powerful bargaining power with those countries than Britain does have on its own. So it's a complete myth to think that we're going to do a better deal outside the Union than inside the Union.
You talked about some of the motives about why people voted the way they did. There's a degree of, let's call it nationalism, without any particular pejorative colour to that word, not necessarily meaning xenophobia or any of the more extreme and horrible aspects that can sometimes conjure. But that nationalism is not unique to Britain within Europe. There are other parts of Europe where there's a degree of nationalism, a degree of desire for separatism from the European Union, in a perception that the European Union is some sort of international elite governing people's lives.
Well, the nationalism you're talking about, I would use it as a resentment. A lot of it's understandable resentment. A lot of people in Europe feel they've missed out somehow in the economic bonanza, if you like it, of the last 30 or 40 years. That's true. And people in referendums don't necessarily answer the question. They see it as an opportunity to express their resentment. So in France, you've got a lot of unhappy people, for the same reason here, who like to get involved with Mrs. Le Pen. And in Hungary, the same thing is happening. This is appearing everywhere. In some areas, more extreme than here. Other governments, fortunately, have not chosen the route of giving the right to express in a referendum. The way to deal with these issues is through the parliamentary system, not through a referendum where the question is such a bland question that nobody knew what the answer was. What is the answer going to be?
Well, I want to move on those ideas of separatism anyway and sovereignty to a slightly more graspable level here in Lincolnshire, and the idea of a greater mayoralty for Lincolnshire, which of course comes right up to the Humber. How would that affect businesses in your area as the local enterprise partnership if there were a completely separate tier of a new and separate tier of government affecting one of your shorelines?
Well, first of all, I believe I'm a strong believer in devolution, and the more power that's taken at more decisions are taken at local level, whether it's political or economic, the better it is. I'm sure of that. But secondly, we have a problem. This political geography and economic geography don't necessarily tie up. So we have political geography of the estuary clearly failed with Humberside County Council. Political geography with Greater Lincolnshire, we have to see. It hasn't been tried for 45 years or 50 years. Economic geography dictates the other way. The economic geography of the Humber estuary is powerful, that there's so much common links between the economy right across the estuary. So you've got the dilemma that everybody says, yeah, we like political geography, which people from Yorkshire stay in Yorkshire and people in Lincolnshire stay in Lincolnshire. But we also have the economic geography where clearly, take energy, for example, we need to work together, all the people around this estuary, as one to make the economic case for the estuary. That's a contradiction which we haven't found an answer to.
Well, and to take the economic geography and broaden it a little further, the Chancellor of the Exchequer up until June, George Osborne, was a great champion, having had a Member of Parliament with the Northern constituency as well, was a great champion of this Northern powerhouse idea, transport infrastructure especially, but a great deal of investment in technology, research and development in the whole of the north of England, and uniting the great cities of the north so that they would have a much greater combined impact. Is that plan still, do you still see hope for that plan now that we have perhaps a less Northern powerhouse-oriented man in number 11?
Well, we have a local MP who's the minister now for Andrew Percy.
We do, but he's not in the cabinet. He's a very junior minister. It's not the Chancellor of the Exchequer advocating this anymore.
I'm assured by that the message is still there. You know, I saw Greg Clark, who's the Secretary of State responsible for the powerhouse, and he is committed to it. Now, the issue at the powerhouse is still a bit vague what it is and what it means. And again, the geography comes into it. I mean, we have originally, the Humber estuary wasn't even mentioned in the powerhouse. Now, we've managed to persuade the powers that be that it is, and including the South Bank. South Bank is clearly, I was reassured this week, is fundamentally part of that powerhouse. And the idea is to get, again, economically, there are huge reasons why Hull, Grimsby, Leeds, Doncaster, Sheffield should be talking together. For example, on the energy issue, we want more than one or two universities involved. We want all the Yorkshire universities involved in this. On the whole area of carbon storage, which is a very important part. That's using getting the carbon dioxide out of coal. That is of great interest to everybody in this part of the world. It's very great interest in Sheffield as well. So the idea of more work, people working more, and also social mobility. What I want to see is more people coming into this area to work, more people leaving this area to work, even living, so that we could get a train from Grimsby to Doncaster every half hour, as opposed to every hour at the moment, I think it is, and improve the mobility. Social mobility is one of the things you're always impressed by when you go to a big city like London, and you're always worried in the Humber area how little mobility there is.
But social mobility isn't the same as geographical mobility. Just being able to move from Grimsby to Doncaster is not the same as being able, the social mobility is, my father was a dustman and I'm a brain surgeon. That's the nature of social mobility.
It depends on the definitions. That's one type of social
I wasn't giving you my autobiography there. I was just trying to think of an example there.
Yeah, but that's one aspect of social mobility. But mobility, a mobile workforce, people moving around more than they do, that is what the Northern Powerhouse was about. That if you got greater connections between Manchester, Sheffield, and Leeds, that was the original idea. Then you would get them operating as one unit, one economic unit, the way Greater London does, and people do move around. So here we have had social immobility, both on the basis you're saying of people not being able to better themselves who would like, and this immobility of people being reluctant to move from one place to another. It's the isolationism of this part of the world. I've lived here for 50 years. Is very striking when you travel around the rest of the world, as I've done. So we relish our remoteness.
Well, there's a certain amount to be relished about remoteness, but we must learn to be less parochial, I suppose. That's
absolutely.
Chris Haskins, thank you very much for coming today. Join me again next week when we'll be having another hot topic.